Hello, everyone, and welcome back to KK's Quilt Studio. This is Marilyn. Today, I'm going to talk about my journey with this grandmother's flower garden. Isn't it pretty? I found this and purchased it from a seller. I believe it was from Nebraska, and uh, I love these vintage quilts. I love the patterns. They're different. They're different from the quilts too that we see in our trainings. People who do videos or help us on Facebook, they all do quilts pretty much that are square. They have straight edges. And what do you do when a quilt top looks like this? It has the ziggy zaggy edge that a grandmother's flower garden does. It's lovely, but it can be a challenge. So I'm going to take you on the journey that I went through with quilting this top. Now, uh, I loaded the top sideways. So this ziggy zaggy border that you see is actually the uh, the sides of the quilt. And I've loaded the side to the top and the other side to the bottom. So the sides are my top and bottom of the quilt, and the straight edges are the actual top and bottom. I decided that I would stay or I would trim in the end the top squarely in a straight line on the side. The top had been washed, and due to that, the agitation of the machine and the tumbling, the spinning, the fabric was quite frayed. So, besides being easier to bind that way, I stayed with simple straight edges on the side, which is the top and bottom of the quilt, and a fairly straight or uniform edge for the top and bottom of the quilt. But that did lend some difficulties. So if we go back to the screen here and look at the top row, and this is just I've recreated what I did. This isn't actually my layout, but a recreation of the layout, and fairly simplified. I used my mask tool, and that is over here on the third row, the fourth button over, so two over from the trim button. This little guy right here. I used that button to trim away, if you will, these portions of the quilt that aren't there. That basically is the batting. So I basted the quilt top down along those uneven edges, and then I came back in and masked out those areas, and cropped them. Well, you see dotted lines. Those are actual jump lines. So when a long arm system cuts out or masks out these portions that you don't want to sew, um, it is still thinking that it is sewing left to right, and it is still sewing that pattern. So this pattern would sew and then come up here and come down, and there is some design that's missing. So it thinks I need to jump to where that design would pick up again and start to sew. And so then you'll see some other jumps to where it's trying to finish that pattern and then move on to the left and right. It'll sew, and then there will be a little tidbit. And that's what was driving me absolutely nuts. So if I zoom in here, you can see that, yeah, cutting this out leaves some of these little tidbits, And while I'm going along the edge of my quilt, and I'll probably be hidden in the binding, I could go back in and edit that. But I didn't know to do that when I was masking out this portion of the design, and I had all of these stops and starts, and it I will tell you was just a hot mess. It made me nuts. But I had gotten rid of all this quilting in an area where I didn't have quilt top, and I didn't want to just basically waste thread. And plus, it was a learning experience as to using my mask tool. It was not not cropping something out of the middle. I was cropping away that border. So I thought it is another good learning tool for us as I describe my journey of going through all the tools and learning Q-Matic. So here you'll see now, if I back out all the way, you'll see that I didn't finish, and this is my way of laying out an edge to edge. I do not lay out the entire quilt filling up with rows of edging. If you'll see, my safe area is right up here, and probably all I'm going to sew is just these couple rows that'll fit inside the safe area of my quilting frame. And if you want to learn more about how I set up edge to edge, you can check out my video on the edge to edge setup that I did. It is not how you're normally trained. It's not how everybody else does it. It is my way of doing things, and it's what I feel comfortable and what I think makes sense to me. I just want to repeat these rows that I have right here, and to me, doing all the other ones is sort of redunculous. It's uh, redundant. Anyway, I've quilted the quilt. I've gotten down here the bottom row, and now I am ready to crop out the bottom of that quilt. I'm not going to need this portion of the quilt. I can do just this last row. So I will go to my mask tool. I would do this on the sew head, but for today's purposes, I'm going to do on the screen. The sew head just gives you more accuracy when you're at the edge of your quilt. I'm going to create a region. I want to remove the inside of this region, and I'm going to ask it to sew the mask outline. All right. So I am going to zoom in using the wheel on my mouse, and I'm going to try and keep this as even as I can. So I'm just going to work on this row, keep it within there. So I clicked out here, my second click was in here, and this will be the tedious part of the video, watching me lay down these lines. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more because I'm using the grid instead of a quilt top. So I'm going about every two lines on the grid. and keeping it small because the other quilt was pretty large. It was about an 80 by 90 quilt. Okay, and we're almost there. Okay, so we'll go out, and I'm going to crop around that bottom line. I'm going to tell it I want all of this gone. So I'm going to close out this entire area. I want this portion to be cut out. Okay, let's preview that. Okay, it didn't take out that design because I didn't have it selected, but it did take out the rest of that design, the red that I did have selected. Now you'll see that there are jump stitches. Okay, so I didn't need to go all the way out, but that's okay. So we'll say, okay, it did crop out that bottom row that I wanted to sew out or to prop out, and that is inside my safe area, so we're all good. But now I want to get rid of those jump stitches. I don't want those. So I have my masked sewing area and this row selected. This is where I'm going to click on my art and stitch. I'm going to send this part of the design over to art and stitch. So join me over there. All right, here we are in art and stitch. It's sent that masked design, and of course you get this simplify smooth, and we're going to cancel that. We don't want that. Now it sent this as a grouped piece. If we go into sequence view and look at what we have selected, you'll see that it is one piece of artwork. And in order to work with that, I need to break it apart. So, okay, I'm going to right click and select break apart. Now, when I select this, you'll see that I've got all these bits and pieces of my design, and here at the top is that masked outline. I'm going to change color for it for now so that I can separate it from the actual design that I'm going to be sewing out. I'm not sewing out this masked area, but I do need it to do the rest of the steps. So I'm not going to delete it, but I am going to lock the little padlock. So that now I can't select it, I can't move it because that part of the design is locked. This part of the design, which is what I want to sew, I am going to connect. So I'm going to go over here to the left vertical toolbar and select connect objects. So that's going to put all that design back together again. And now I have solid a solid piece, don't I? I have a solid sewing line. So I need to edit that. So those were my jump stitches that have now become sewing lines. And every situation is going to be different because your cropping is going to be different. But I can see from this design that it's doing something weird here, jumping over here. So I, in this case, may need to actually break that design. So let's look at our reshape tool and look at that piece. So actually there's a red dot, so that actually looks like it's gonna start sewing there. Okay, let's zoom out and take a look at this design. But I'll probably just break that. I think I'll just break it rather than get too detailed for you. I can show you. Let me show you how it looks when it would sew out. So let's go back to select. Let's apply stitches. Let me hit the space bar to zoom out. And sometimes when you crop, when you mask out an area, it does wild and crazy things. You just never know what you're going to get. So I've applied stitches. Let's see where it wants to start stitching. Yeah, it has decided to change up and start stitching on the right hand side, which is not how I had it set up. But that's okay. We can revert that and change it when we get back. Like I said, you may get some strange things, but it's all in good. We we have the power. We can change this. So I'm going to go to my reshape tool and I am going to split this line. So I'm going to click on that, left click on that node, right click, and split line. Okay. And then I will nudge over. And actually, there is that piece. I don't want that. I want it to go away. So I will just hit delete or cut, and then let's back out. Okay, that is the only really strange thing. I do have one extra long line here, so we're going to go in and run these running lines, which are trying to connect up. Remember, they're trying to connect up the next sew. So let's zoom in. Let's work from left to right. I'm going to zoom in here. Go back to, okay, so this node, I want to move to this line. Remember, this line was the edge of my quilt, so that's going to be where I'm actually going to bind this quilt. So I'm moving nodes to be in that binding line. Okay. This one is a little bit outside. That's okay for me. That's going to stitch into the fluff of the quilt, into the batting. It won't stitch on the top, but I'm okay with that little bit. This line, I will click on the line and I will right click and we'll add a cusp point. So then I will drag that node, and it's probably a little slow because I'm filming. I'm going to drag that node, and you'll see that line is moving. So the purple line gives me the new placement. I have the ghost line of where that stitching was, and I'm going to, here's my handle bars, my anchor bars, and I can bring that line simply holding and dragging up. So that will come within that binding line. And if I click off, now it shows my new sewing line. Okay, that one is good. This one, I can live with that one. That's a short running jump. I can't live with this where it's cutting across my sewing. So these I'll all need to clean up. I think I went a little bit too far. I'll use my arrows. Okay. So again, on locate your mouse cursor on that line, right click, add a cusp point. A cusp point will give you an angular point so that I can bring this down and locate it outside and bend my anchor points up to run along the edge of that quilt where again my binding is going to lay. So now purple tells me where I moved it. The ghost line is where I moved it from. I'll click off of it, and now there's not a sewing run going across. Okay, I'll need to do that with this. I could double click on a line to add a node, but it always adds a smooth point, and then I would have to change that. So this one, I'm going to need to run all the way around. So I will need to add another cusp node because I'm going to have to run it down and around that bottom side so that I'm not, oh, and I didn't mean to split line. Accidents happen. There's always that undo tool. All right, add cusp node. And I'll just continue on changing any errant points so that I can bring that stitching into. So here is where it cut across, and I'm changing it up. So I'm going to add a cusp point and drag that one up to the corner. I know it looks round. I just need to move my anchor points so that it's not sewing into my quilt top. Okay. So instead of sewing straight across, now I've got it running outside of my quilt top, and I will select this last one and add a cusp point and drag, click and drag that line down here to the outer boundaries. Straighten it out a little bit. I know it may seem a little fiddly, but I like using Art and Stitch. I'm an Art and Stitch instructor, and wherever I can use Art and Stitch, um, I I'm all on it. Okay, these are pretty short, cut across. I can live with those. So that cleans up the major part. That one we could still do, but you get the point. Okay, we are ready to apply when we already applied stitches. So we're ready to send this back to our Q-Matic. So if you were working, that's probably why I was so slow. I should have had this in artwork when I was working on it. I changed it back to run just so you could see um, where it was sewing. So you always want to select the design, go back here, change it back to artwork when you're working on it. So that's why when I was moving points, I was having so much trouble with it being slow. Um, so now I'm ready. If I had it at artwork, I'd be ready to go back to stitches. I'm already in stitches, so I am ready to send this baby back over to Q-Matic. And I've saved it in a temp file. That's my experimental file. Already exists. Yes, I want to replace it. Okay, and we're going to go back over, and it has sent my design, my new modified design, back to Q-Matic. I decided that I didn't need that last row. We'll delete it, but now I need to move this row up here to the original placement. This is something I hope Bernina works on. I requested, it's on my wish list, that the design goes back to the original placement where you put it. Okay, um, so I'm going to manually click and drag this back up, and then I will use the little nubbins, these little arrows, to nudge it back into place. So we've got our new design back here, and it does not have these jump stitches. So it is going to sew out as one continuous design, if you will. And so I would zoom in on this and get that placement right on top of the old design. And I need to come over and up a little bit, but you get the drift. So I can delete this sew area because I'm not going to need it, and it also deletes my design. So when I back out, it is in place, and I'm ready to stitch this last row. Now remember, when I sent it over there, when I cropped it, it decided to reverse my sewing. So my stop is on my left, my green is on my right. I can always, if I select this last design, I can always change that if I want to sew left to right. I don't have problems sewing right to left, left to right, either which way. It doesn't matter for me. But that is kind of how I ended up stitching out that bottom row without having to stitch into a blank area or off my quilt. That is how I used the mask tool in another way rather than cropping something out of the middle. So I hope that is something different for you to take away. Maybe someday you'll have an uneven row when you, if I had to trim the bottom edge of a quilt, you know that I have the trim tool and it trims basically straight across horizontal. I can trim it at an angle, but only one angle. So the uh, trim tool was not going to work for me. I decided the mask tool was what I needed to do to get an uneven area like that. So I hope you've enjoyed another way of learning another way to use your mask tool, and I hope it will be valuable to you sometime when you are uh, at your quilt top or have a quilt top that is a little bit unusual, and you'll be able to come back to this video and learn how you can use the tools in your Q-Matic to work for you. Be sure to like this video. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. And if you have comments, leave them down in the comment area. I always enjoy getting feedback, and maybe you have a problem or a question that I can address in a future video. So until next time, I wish you all happy quilting.